Good evening. Happy Tuesday night, and welcome to the September chapter meeting of the San Fernando Valley Climate Reality Project. We have a very special guest speaker tonight. I'm really excited to hear all about artificial reefs and blue carbon credits. But before we dive right into that topic, we're going to go ahead and do a little chapter housekeeping. We like to begin always with a land acknowledgement. And this evening, our land acknowledgement is going to be read by Fran Lee, who's been a longtime member of the chapter, even though she doesn't live in the valley. We do take all comers from any area. She's actually out in Ventura County. And she's a co-liaison with the Citizens Climate Lobby out there. So this year, her chapter of CCL has been engaging with an alliance of Ventura County groups to do work on promoting the Polluters Pay, Climate Superfund, and the cap and trade reauthorization for lowering electric rates, all sorts of good work. We really appreciate everything that Fran does. And now, Fran, will you honor us with the land acknowledgement tonight?
Thank you. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Indigenous peoples as stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and their traditional territories. It acknowledges the history that has brought us to reside on this land and the colonialism that is present in our current systems and calls on us to be mindful of our present participation in it. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Tongva, Quiche, Tataviam, and Chumash tribes. And I live in Moore Park, and there is, was a Chumash tribe that was it's in one of these little parks outside of Moore Park, sort of Happy Canyon Cap Canyon, I think it's called. And it was called Kimmy Shacks. And I think I heard an NPR post recently that said, if you hear a land acknowledgement, you should go out and buy a book about Indigenous peoples. So that's what I encourage you to do. I'll do it too.
Well, there's a lovely prompt. Thank you for that encouragement, Fran.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll have some reading this month. Well, many of you here are already members of Climate Reality, but for anyone who's new joining us for the first time or who hasn't joined yet, we do encourage you to join the Climate Reality organization. So we are one chapter of a worldwide organization that has chapters in every major city around the globe, really. Um, by joining the larger organization and being a member of our chapter, you get access to a lot more resources through Climate Reality Project. So they put on a lot of really interesting webinars, more nationally focused actions, that sort of thing, whereas our focus tends to be more local. So if you are interested in general education about all sorts of topics, it's a great resource. There's no cost to join, there's no commitment or obligation, but you can go ahead and click that link in the chat, which will take you directly to a sign up page where you can join our chapter officially, and then you'll get occasional emails from Climate Reality Project with whatever they've got going on more nationally. Our guest speaker, Chris Goldblatt, is here, so I'm going to give a short intro to him and then hand it over. We're really so lucky to have him here tonight. So, I mean, he's spent his whole life on and in the water, in every part of the globe. And this passion is what led him to found the Fish Reef Project. So he's going to tell us all about his work there, making artificial reefs that enhance ecosystems, that improve local fisheries and shore up food security. He's set goals and he's achieving them, implementing direct actions to improve the ocean health with real results. And he's also the inventor of the Sea Cave True Blue Carbon Blue Credit System. So blue carbon credits are something we've been wanting to learn more about. And he's going to be able to give us an overview of how this system is working to create a primary funding platform for large-scale ocean restorations. So I'm really excited about this. Chris, welcome and thank you for being here tonight.
So, well, thank you for the kind introduction. It's always nice to hear supportive words like that, and it's really an honor to be among like-minded people tonight. So, I'll dive into the slide deck. You capture my background just fine. I've basically have more than 40 years of ocean experience, starting from 8 years old. I grew up in a humble community in Malibu where if we wanted something to eat, we had to catch it. So that's really where it started, and then. Studying fisheries and business and aquaculture at Humboldt State, now Cal Poly Humboldt, and then had pioneered a series of small scale sustainable fisheries that have been around for 25, 30 years, and pioneered the sustainable seafood movement while I was still in college. So one thing has led to another. And I started making reefs when I was 13, when I first started diving lobsters in Santa Monica Bay, where there's very little habitat. And many years later, I had a great tragedy at sea and sunk, and we all almost died. And while I'm treading water 20 miles offshore in the middle of the night, I thought, well, if I make it through this, I think I'll go back to making reefs because that's a way to make more life in the ocean that I've impacted, basically. So that was the genesis of it. That was in 2003. So skip forward all these years, and you have the Fish Reef Project, which is a 501(c)(3) founded formally in 2011, Santa Barbara. We've had the same board of directors and the same mission statement that entire time with no mission creep. And we run a tight ship, no pun intended. Nonprofit management is something that you learn by doing. And I don't just mean from a financial sense. I mean in the greater sense of balancing all the different interests and there's the different mindsets that come to play, and then turning it into something actionable, right? That's a real skill set that gets learned over time. And here in Santa Barbara, I think we have the highest per capita registered nonprofits in the world. There's like 3,500 or something. So to be heard amongst that noise requires something very special in terms of just dedication. And eventually, our local paper finally got behind it, the Independent, and that's me on the cover there. And I've done a number of local talk shows and really enjoyed a lot of press. This year, we had a full article in Surfer magazine, things like that. So to wind it back to the beginning here, most plankton, all plants come from phytoplankton, whoops, and all animals in the ocean come from zooplankton. It's that simple. It's just these two little things that everything comes from, and each one is potential, right? It can stay a plankton, you have those, and the whales like eating those. Or it can settle and grow and become something as big as a 20-pound lobster, right? Or a giant kelp stock that lives 6 or 7 years, or an abalone that lives for 80 or 90 years, or an urchin that doesn't ever die. That's what plankton potential is. So, but it typically needs hard, complex, chemically balanced structure to settle on and become greater life forms. So, structure, good structure, right? Good structure is not the same as structure. It's not all created equal. It becomes an oasis in the desert. So if 99.9999% of all plankton perish because it floats around and turns into detritus, this rain, and then it becomes petroleum, right? It becomes oil. That's what you're putting in your car is plankton, right? If we could just skip the middleman, I think we might be better off. But so by putting sea caves down our reef structures, it allows just a fraction of that plankton to realize its potential. And that's where the carbon sequestration comes in. And it's a fully justified mission because we don't subscribe to words like this is going to go extinct, bluefin are going to go extinct. So I don't like the word extinct. It's too draconian, and frankly, it's not true. Most things don't go extinct in the ocean. They do on land. But I do like to look at real science where, say, 90% of the kelp has died in a good chunk. Let's say in the last 15-year cycle, it doesn't mean it's permanently gone. It means it's gone right now. But there are reasons I will share with you why I think a good chunk of it is permanently gone unless we do something. So I think it's okay to look at the facts, and if the facts are dire, share them as facts. I try to skip hyperbole. I think that has worked really against the climate thing. And I understand it takes that to get it going, but I think there's a time and place to pull back on that. So the sea cave is a 1-ton unit. It's made out of pH balanced marine concrete that lasts for 500 years underwater. It's a very simple design, but I mean, so is a rocket, right? A rocket goes up and it looks pretty simple to me, big old tube with some fire shooting out of it. I'm pretty sure some engineering went into SpaceX or Apollo or whatever, right? That's the kind of thinking that went into this shape you see in front of you. The best contemporary ocean minds in the world, not just mine, got together and put together 1,000 years of combined interest into one shape that would service the ocean the best. And this is what we came up with. And there's a lot of reasons why the shape is what it is. Some of it is so the sand flows through it and it doesn't sink into the sand, which happens to about 80% of the structures that are put on the seafloor. You get a whirling effect inside that gets the fish going. It catches the dead kelp to feed the sessile invertebrates like abalone and stuff like that. And then it has this nice, beautiful rounded shape for the kelp to settle on and the holdfast, the part that attaches to grow to its full size, which is about a meter diameter. And then it can withstand heavy swell events and not tear off and live its full 7-year life cycle that way. If the shape is not right, that won't happen. Somebody's asking me to admit. Okay, I just admitted somebody. Oh, I feel so powerful. Okay. It's being transcribed. Okay, next slide. Let's see here. Okay, so when you're working with unlimited resources, you are left with volunteer advice for the most part and your own experience. And then you make these decisions based on your best educated guesses, and any single one of them can be fatal because of your investment in that moment. And we went through about 100 of those type decisions in making the sea cave. And there were a few times when I just went, nice knowing you guys, this is not going to work. But we managed to work through some of those issues. And we ended up with a scalable system that doesn't require air bladders or release agents or all the other things that you normally associate with making precast concrete. This is something that can be made in 1 minute, 60 seconds. We can make one of these. And then, of course, you have to, pull them out and let them cure and then transport them and all of that. But the actual manufacturing is in order of magnitude faster than anything similar to it. We're very proud of that. That's why we've patented it in half of the planet for that reason. And you can see it pouring in there that the viscosity or the slump, as they call it, with I had to become a concrete nerd to do this, right? I didn't know anything about concrete. I had to really understand it. And it has to flow just right. You have to have just the right size aggregate. And then those little pock marks on the top are like on a golf ball where the water speeds up temporarily. And it creates a centrifugal eddying effect and gets the plankton stimulated. That's how much this has been thought about. This is our project in Mexico. That's the Argos. This is in Baja, California, in 50 feet of water off of Isla San Martin, off of San Quintin, Baja, which is 300 miles from Santa Barbara, or let's say 5 hours past the border. And it took 2 years to permit in Mexico. It's a very difficult process, not unlike our own process here that took us 10 years to permit the Goleta project. I'll say that again. It took 10 years to permit the Goleta project. And no $1 million check writer. This is all my life savings combined with raising $10 at a time to do it. So this is where we ended up. We have a beautiful lease because our goal here is not to make an artificial reef. Our goal here is to make a biogenic reef, which means it completely emulates a natural reef insofar as humans are capable, right? And that means it has the size and scope. It means that after a year of looking at these on the seafloor, you'll swim over it and go, that's a nice reef, and you won't even think it's made by a human. That's the objective here. I care what it looks like underwater, right? I do. Some people, that's not part of the thought process, right? But it is with us. And so this is what it looks like. We had to invent the deployment system, the stacking system. Is the ship going to roll over and sink and everybody's going to die? I sure hope not, right? It turns out it didn't, right? That's the risk level we're talking about. We weren't quite that reckless. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you guys understand what I'm saying. And I had to learn how to shoot underwater photography, which I still struggle with, I admit. It's very technical. And to get a shot like this requires probably 200 dives over about a 2-year period, trying everything you can think of to get that much information into one shot. To where I don't even think I have to explain what's going on here. You could just tell. That's our underwater dive team though. And the umbilical looks very sort of maternal. And he's lowering them into place. And the distance between the sea caves, that's also a huge interesting topic, because what happens is you not only get this beautiful algal community, they call it, all these different beautiful called these green things called dead man's fingers, and the macrocystis that I swear it grows while you look at it. It grows that fast. You're like, I'm gonna go eat lunch, go back. Oh, look, it's a foot longer. It's what it feels like. And and the lobsters and everything going in, but the sand itself, and we discovered this. It's called the halo effect. Something happens where that sand stratifies and you actually get sort of beautiful growth out of the sand, and all kinds of worms and things live in the sand because the reef is close to it. And even you get seagrass stabilization. So it has this knock-on effect to benefit the seagrass and the eelgrass around the world. We've noticed that. I can't really explain it. So we're looking into why that is, but it's definitely been observed. This is what a giant kelp holdfast looks like when it first grabs. And that's a 1-inch riser lip on there that was put there specifically for that reason, because I've seen so many rocks where it just takes just the right divot for that floating around planktonic giant kelp seed to settle and grow and grab. And as you can see, that works. 7 months. 7 months. And I mean, can you ask for a better, like, from a natural capital point of view, return on investment of putting something like that in the water, and you have the makings of a giant kelp forest? I mean, it's nothing short of amazing. On the right, this is a lobster just saying, how you doing? They thought there was a lot of discussion, about, because the lobster fishery financially is probably the biggest beneficiary right now for this kind of thing. We don't really weigh it in those terms. It's just a data point. But normally lobster like a lot of cryptic stuff. I mean, lobsters, I hope you like eating them, but they are kind of the cockroaches of the ocean. And they act like that. They're like little dark crevices, and they come out at night and all that stuff. And the fascinating animal, but I said, no, it just needs to have a large area with enough for them to go in upside down and hang on upside down. And that turned out to be true too. So, because that was another one of those educated guesses, and these hold up to like 80 lobsters at a time. It's really neat to see. Some more shots, 7 months in. And this area is very exposed to it. This has withstood 2 direct hit class 4 hurricanes right over the top of it. A couple of 20-foot swell events where you're just sure it's going to be gone. And it is, and it isn't. I think one of them has sanded halfway in, but the kelp still grows on the crown of it sticking out. So that's a giant sheephead on the right. That's how you know that you have a properly diverse marine ecosystem, is when you have a lot of bull male adults of anything, because those are the first to go if an area, if something's not right in the environment, too much fishing, or the habitat's not right, you won't see those kinds of animals. On the left, you have the calico bass, that little black plaque. I actually buried my mother and father in that one on a side point. That's why it's called Tina Reef. She loved the project. Right, you're lucky to see one calico bass, one on a reef like that. I don't know how many calico bass are right there, but I'm just going to go ahead and say looks like about 250, something like that. Calico on the left, you see female sheephead, more calico bass. Those are fresh. Those have been down in maybe a month. And you get this biofilm on it. This fish has 3 names. You know what? I'm not going to tell you what that's called. I'm going to do a quiz, and whoever can answer the actual current name used for it, with bonus points for telling me what the other 2 historical names were, I'll send you a gold star. Yellowtail. Here's another educated guess, right? People say, well, it's not going to they're low profile. They're 1 meter tall. They're not going to attract what we call pelagic fish or blue water fish, semi-pelagic fish. And I went, no, that's not true. You just need to put them in the right place. And you have to group them right. And it has to be the right angle of seabed. And it will work because it will. And it did. Right. I'm like, wow, yellowtail. And so getting the pictures is another special challenge. So you have large fish, you have pelagic fish, you have benthic stuff like scallops forming on it, a few red sea urchins. There's no sea urchin barrens so far. And I think that's because the spacing between the sea caves is a stop for the purple urchins to crawl. It's a natural stop. So I don't really need to explain what you're seeing here, but there's 4 groups of those in there. And so where we have projects around the world is Baja and then Galita here, which is going to expand. But we also have projects in the water in Papua New Guinea. And then they're starting in Senegal and Kenya. And the lobsters in Papua New Guinea they're called like Panulurus versicolor or Panulurus ornatus because they're these beautiful rainbow colored animals, but they're the fastest growing lobster in the world. And they go and they shed and they molt, and every year 80% of them just get eaten by something because they're exposed. And if there was shelter for them, you would have a higher survival rate, right? So you're not. So anyway, there's benefits like that. Abalone, these are pink abalone, Haliotis rufescens, which have made a really good comeback in both Southern California and Baja, and the Mexican co-ops have a fishing, highly regulated fishery for it. The United States does not, and there's political reasons for that. I'll answer some other time. But I've been around long enough to see the cycles of how things live and die and grow in the ocean and come back. The Department of Natural Resources in South Carolina was our first customer. They paid us for 3 of them and they put them inside the marine protected area. And this is after 3 months. Big gray snapper and spadefish and chub mackerel, really neat to see. So I'll just touch on the carbon. The risk of going too deep into this is it's complicated as shit. It's part of the reason why the carbon thing struggles is because how, I'm going to go ahead and cuss again, how goddamn complicated it is. And we have gone through that complication and we really understand it, right? It just is not, it's just hard to barf that all over the page and get everybody to understand it. So here I'm just going to say it really simple. Each sea cave generates 5 what we call true blue carbon credits. Okay, that's a trademark term. Sea cave is trademarked and patented. There is IP protections in place here. And I realize that's not how normally the carbon world tends to work, where you kind of socialize or privatize risk and socialize gain. That's no way to get innovation to occur. You need to reward the innovator, or at least give them a first mover's advantage for a while. And then you'll see more innovation in the carbon world. I think that's a good way to think about it. And so each one makes 5, but what makes it a true blue carbon credit, because it's in the ocean, that the only definition of blue carbon, ocean carbon, is that it generally takes place in the ocean. Mangroves, I guess that's ocean, right? And it's called blue carbon. I support the hell out of those projects. So I'm not going to say, well, it's not really in the ocean or anything like that. It's a very broad term, but it could be defined a little better. I think that would be a thing to do. But we have also created a marine biodiversity credit, which up until now was called a blue credit, but I understand the confusion there. So we're working on the naming. But it's highly simplified, and that's why it works. For every true blue carbon credit that goes through verification and then registered, which, let me just say how hard of a task that is. It's a multi-year task. Big investment to do that. Once it is greenlit on the registry and there for anybody to buy, when somebody buys it, we attach a marine biodiversity credit to it that is essentially a contract that guarantees 100 kilograms of marine life is generated. And that's free. That's no charge. It's a value add to the carbon, and that's what gives it the combined value. So you spend $200 on one of these credits, you get the guarantee of the carbon sequestration, and you get to guarantee the marine life. And that has been the dream of the entire sort of like ocean environmental natural capital complex is to try to drive banking dollars in and out the other side is expressed through healthier Mother Nature. That's been the goal. And there's been way too many bottlenecks and confusion and way too many fingers in the pie to make that happen. So we went on, we had to create our own standalone system that was free of all of that. And we have, and that's why it's successful. So I'll just leave it there. You can look at the blue carbon tab on our webpage if you want to learn more. Certainly anybody who buys one of these, even if it's just to offset their own blue carbon footprint, that money goes directly into making more reefs. For every $2,000 we get, one sea cave goes in the water. It's a very simple equation. The sales of these have been, it's been a little bit challenging because nobody buys anything they don't have to. And I hate to be that guy. You got to do it, but that's how this works right now. And the carbon market in general struggles because of that aspect of it. It's better to sell these to people that want them than people that should buy them. And, so we're hoping that I think on the individual level, I think that's possible. I think enough people have a conscience enough to support it. I'm not anti-capitalist, but I don't think that corporations think that way. I'll just leave it at that. I think that a mandate is required in many cases. But what we try to get people to understand is your normal carbon footprint is X. What percentage of that is your blue carbon footprint? And it's any part of your life or your supply chain that has in any way touched or impacted the ocean. And I got news for the world. That's almost everything. Because everything gets moved by freight. Pollution, all rivers flow to the ocean for all the mining we do around the world. So for somebody's portfolio to be complete or offset to be considered complete, we're trying to get people to accept that idea and enter it into legislation where we can, that 15% needs to be blue carbon. It's a goal that we strive for. It'll be many years until that's accomplished. So anyway, this is the data sheet I can send to you. It basically has all the registration, everything like that. This is what a hike in envisaged, that's a word I learned at the UN, so I like to throw it around. I think that means envisioned in American. Is that this is a high production facility that can put out about 20,000 sea caves a year. We may or may not work on this level. It may be better to have many more small facilities around the world and kind of contouring things a little bit more. So this remains to be seen if we'll operate at this level or if it'll be more sort of bespoke. This is what it looks like when you load on the barge. And, marine assets are very, very expensive to rent by the day. Something like this, about $75,000 a day to do this. So if you forget your toothbrush and have to go back in, that'll cost you $150,000. So you better get it right. And the weather call is like D-Day, deciding to go, okay, we're going to go. The 3 apps and my instinct and my friend who lives on the beach says the weather's good, go. It's a very hard call to make. This is the lease that we have, that's 65 acres in front of the island. That's an actual side scan sonar image of the current reef, which is currently at about 8 acres. And it's just, God, I never get tired of seeing it. Science is a big part of it. You can go overboard with science. Like you do have to be careful not to let science, because it's tempting to want to know everything all the time. And that costs a lot of money. And you have to know where that line is up to the point of cannibalizing your operational budget. And you have to be honest with your scientists about where that line is. I've learned that. I just want to share that. And the scientists end up being happier because they know what the reality is in terms of the budget. So we had to learn how to do side scan sonar. Not an easy thing to do, to get a picture. These are the actual sea caves as they lie. And I would like to take credit for that natural mosaic shape, because that's more what nature would put down there. But that's because anchoring that vessel in those conditions meant pulling it around by the stern anchor. So you end up with this fan shape. But that ended up being the ideal shape. This is what you can expect in the tropics. The tropics are a different challenge, but we do have projects in the tropics with good coral and fish recruitment. The social benefits tend to be the same to the local They're indigenous peoples tribes is what they are. And it's a very interesting relationship to work with people that have lived off of Mother Nature for 9,000 years. It's a very interesting relationship. And then to go back and say, look, this is this is the benefit to your tribe. Do you want it or don't you? And if they do, the village elders all sign a compact. Like, I want to make sure nobody said don't bring it here yet, but we always want to make sure that there's a very clear relationship with the people adjacent to the project. This is our team in the US and our team in Mexico on the left. Great group of people. They tend to, everybody tends to stay unless they, have to move or something. We're all very loyal to the cause, essentially. This is Papua New Guinea, and we've attended a bunch of UN functions and different things. So there's a high here in terms of access, I guess you could say. Bangladesh, I didn't realize what an American giant I was until I lent my friend my shirt. Anyway, you'll never meet nicer people in the world, in my opinion, than in Bangladesh. It was a really heartening experience. West Africa is great, great people. You do have governmental challenges in Africa. It's true. You have them here too in a different way. So you just have to be patient and persistent and work with the right people, and you do find success. And there are ways to reduce conflicts with the reefs. Where in places where, like in West Africa, if they fish next to the oil rigs, they are risking their life, and because you're not allowed to fish. So creating alternate fishing grounds when certain ones have been closed is really a humanitarian component to it, which we're very proud of that. In Papua New Guinea, a huge amount of the people in the fisheries are women. They essentially manage the fishermen and the distribution, the fishermen being their husbands. The guy, I'll just say it, you can crucify me if you want, but when the men come in, they give the wives the money, and the wives give them just enough money to go have fun for a couple nights, and then the women spend it on, how it should be spent. And it's a really good arrangement. So this is Goleta, 7 months after it's gone underwater. This is the kelp canopy all the way to the surface in 40 feet of water. So it's just hard empirical evidence of what we have going on here. This is Goleta. I think this is about 18 months in. This was in June. The visibility is a challenge here because they've dumped 800,000 tons of landslide waste onto Goleta Beach that has leached out into the ocean. The optics are horrible. The mud comes from Montecito and is dumped on Goleta. The optics of it are horrible, and what it's done to the bay is tough. You got to call a spade a spade. So, but it hasn't slowed the marine life growth. It's just the correlation's not there between dirty water and bad growth. It's nutrition in the water, and there's so much nutrition in the water it overrides the bad water quality. Yeah, so I mean, this has maybe 9 different kinds of marine algae on it, including obviously giant kelp, and you see how the holdfasts grow nicely on the curve. That's by design. This is winter senescence, where every year the giant kelp kind of shrinks and then it grows back in the springtime. It typically doesn't die unless the holdfast tears off, like I said. And then it springs back to life, and it can do that about 7 times before it just dies. This was our last run to Baja, sheephead and calicos. This is back in Goleta. These are listed rockfish. Those are boccaccio. Those are that were once considered endangered. And there's a lot of juveniles that go here to breed. Just having fun with it here. And that's it. I'd be happy to take questions.
Oh, that was so fun. I love seeing all the underwater photos. How many of those dives were you on personally?
Every one of them.
Everyone.
Yeah. Well, maybe there were 2 in Mexico. I finally hired a professional photographer, and I'm a terrible underwater movie maker because I want what's in my head to be in his head without talking. It's a challenge. I just went back and filmed it myself.
the only way to get what you want. All right, I have so many questions to ask, so people can go ahead and start entering their questions in the chat, and we'll get through as many as we can. You can go ahead and stop sharing your screen so that we can just look at your face unless there are things on the slides that you want to refer to further. But first of all, how much does one of those sea caves weigh?
They weigh 2,200 pounds, right? So, and they use about a half a yard of concrete to get to 2,200 pounds, and they're very, very high density concrete.
And so what is the range of depth that you can place them in? So you mentioned being, 40 feet down. How shallow or how deep have you put these?
So they go from right now, they go from say 20 to 70 feet of water. But there's really no depth limit. They're not going to fail at a certain depth. In fact, they went for a long boat ride. They were going to go in 15,000 feet of water for a scientific experiment to see how they would do. And they had technical difficulties, didn't put them in the water, but they were going to be tested. So there is interest in like really what's really the limit.
Okay. And do you need divers down there when you're sighting them, to kind of watch and is there any steering, or do you just drop them in and go?
No, it's very delicate. It's a very delicate procedure. You have a 4-point anchor. You've done extensive mapping and dive surveys, figuring out exactly where to put them and even which way to orientate them into the current is considered. And then we have a very good commercial dive team with surface to air comms that basically walk them into place. It can be quite dangerous down there with multiple divers. I've had those things almost land on me a couple times. So right now I have a new rule, just the one commercial diver down there.
That makes sense. Yeah, ocean currents can be tricky.
Mm.
All right, I see a couple people asking about, kelp forest versus coral reefs. So is that just location dependent? Like some places are, where kelp grows and some are where coral grows, or do you make different caves that encourage coral growth versus kelp growth? How does that work?
There's more of a crossover technically than you would think, but we do have stony corals in California. There are purple and orange. They're quite beautiful. There and then there are areas where it almost looks like a coral bed out at Clemente Island. But for the most part, it's water temperature. If you want a kelp forest, you need water temperature, heavy current, and nutrients. And then long springtime days. That's what you need. And for coral, you need warm, clear water. It doesn't like coral is the antithesis of kelp in terms of the water it prefers.
Interesting. So do you seed them at all? Like when you put them down, do you introduce kelp seeds or anything like that? Or is it all just put them down and wait for whatever to float by?
We've done both. The seeding is more of a you hope it works good enough to, how can I say this as gently as possible? It's a good activity for humans to do. Certainly with coral planting, you see a dividend. So if you were to work with the local communities and say, find broken pieces of live coral that have broken off on the seabed, get natural clay that you make with your hands at home and stick that to the sea cave and it'll grow faster into a coral head. That's a good activity. Planting kelp and all that stuff, it remains to be seen. I tend to prefer to just let Mother Nature do its thing in most cases.
And you don't see a big difference in timing for how long it takes things to get started growing.
Well, no, coral's a pain in the neck. It takes forever, no matter how good you are. Yeah, I mean, look, staghorns will grow a foot in a year, so people want to go for maximum pop on that. So the tropics for the first 5 years, you're really talking fish and lobster. And then after about 5 years, you get something that starts to actually look like a coral reef.
All right, some more questions from the chat. Is the Goleta location near the marine protection area? And can you talk a bit about the permitting for Goleta? You mentioned it took a long time. So what are the challenges there?
Yeah, I mean, look, you have 11 state and federal agencies, and you don't have a state reefing program in California. Not one that is actually operational. All the rest of the states do. and they use the public monies to do it. We do not. So we showed up and said, okay, that's missing. We'll do that. And we'll do it. We'll do it right. And we'll do it better than the government ever could. And that's true. And way cheaper. So going through the permitting, there were no blatant obstacles, but it did have to be done right, and it was expensive as hell. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, and we're expanding it, and we've done monitoring 4 times a year, which is a lot. But that science has been very handy, and then now expanding it because there was a historic kelp forest right there for 900,000 years, right there. And the Santa Barbara Bight doesn't have very much kelp except for where there's big ledges, because every 200 years those boulders fall off the hillside and that becomes a reef material. And we had that 200-year event in 2015. We lost 23 lives here. But those boulders don't make it into the ocean. They're stopped by houses and hedges and things like that. So we're actually just putting back what Mother Nature used to put there.
Okay, this is good because I was wondering about introducing sea caves into areas that are just bare floor that didn't already have, the sort of ground that would naturally grow kelp. But it sounds like you're focused more on replacing, a lost amount of variation in the seafloor. Is that true kind of in all your sites, or some places are you introducing reef structures that were never there?
It's a mixture. I would say it's a mixture of both, but what I would do is look at the overall kelp cover, historical kelp cover. So if you had a million square acres of historical kelp cover, and we're down to 100,000 for the area where it grows, anywhere where I make a large kelp forest is a victory in terms of gaining the overall number back. That's how we look at it.
Yeah, it really is. Michael has a question about how do you offset the carbon footprint of the concrete? So we have talked in this group about, building materials and legislation regarding building materials and concrete specifically because of the large amount of carbon footprint. Do you calculate that into your blue carbon credit?
Oh yeah, it's definitely required, that whole thing. So our main supplier, Cemex, first of all, it's not concrete that's the issue, it's the cement, which is less than 10% of the mix. Concrete's just, the rest of it's just rock and sand. And I mean, so we're basically taking an organic natural material and just reshaping it and putting it back in nature. That's what we're doing. But historically, there was heat applied to make cement, and that did have a carbon footprint to it. The large, first world plants have very little fugitive escape at this point if the cement's made in the US or in Canada and stuff like that. They manage to capture most of it and do other things with it. In Mexico, where we make our current ones, they put the number at 250 kilograms per ton of about 125 kilos of CO2 is currently emitted to make one sea cave. Our suppliers have a plan to bring their own greenhouse gas emissions down to net zero by whatever it is, 2050 or whatever it is. But even if that's not true, ours sequesters 5 tons a year for the 125 that's emitted. So nature wins in that equation either way, whether or not they bring that down to zero with the cement supplier.
Good to hear. Good to hear. So for the carbon credits, do you benefit at all from California's cap and trade rules? Is your carbon credit an option for companies that are trying to comply with cap and trade rules?
No, and I'll tell you why. For California, and I applaud their system in a lot of ways. They just have this narrow bandwidth of what's allowed to be on there. And it's a multi-year system to get on there. That door, I would say, is like slammed shut in the face of carbon project developers. That's my jaded take on it. Because that would be wonderful if they could sell our credits at $80 a piece into the regulated California market. It would pay for the reefing program, but that's not currently the case. So that's if they had a blue carbon index on there.
Yeah.
And I'm not a fan of taxation, so I would hope that there would be ways where, I don't know. Let me give you one example. The blue carbon, the blue credit, the biodiversity credit, So let's say you buy and retire the carbon on the exchange. You're going to get an email from my office that says, give me your digital wallet ID, and we're going to give you an NFT token that is the fungible contract for that biodiversity credit. It's yours. Now, I gave it to you, but someday there may be a market. And I would love it if people could sell that and make their entire expenditure back so they had no out of pocket on the carbon. I would love that. And so creating a market, a secondary market like that, that's ethical and above board. Games have been played with crypto and stuff. Um, Something that just people just buy and move around instead of other things like gold and dollars.
So can you imagine, if we're dreaming here, what legislation could California pass that would move us in the right direction?
That the air quality index um, was open to any reasonable project, any reasonable project. And if I had my druthers, that 15% of anybody's carbon budget has to be blue carbon or comprised from, projects that are in the ocean, right? And that would certainly drive it. And there'd be other projects besides ours that would come out of that. And I'm not saying we want a monopoly on that.
All right, Legislative Committee, take notes on that. All right, we have a couple questions about Mexico. Michael's asking, what's the best way to approach the Mexican government for kelp forest restoration projects? How are they with funding compared to,
We
US
haven't,
government?
well, we haven't received any. They do have a kelp restoration program, but from their federal government. I'm sure there's competitions for small amounts of grants that come out of that. We tend to try to focus our resources on things where there's a greater chance of success in terms of finance. So I'm really happy with the way that the Mexican government has treated us and the fishing co-ops and the locals and just all of it. It's been a really good experience. It hasn't been the easiest it hasn't been the easiest here either. So it's not like it's just it's a hard thing to do, period. So anyway, I know that's a long-winded answer. I just want to give you the full picture that there are people that really have very good intentions in the Mexican government, but we just are happy with the permitting relationship.
Gotcha. So what about other locations? There's one question Diana's asking about the Sea of Cortez on the eastern coast of the Baja Peninsula. What about the Channel Islands? What about, Northern California? What are other potential sites that you're looking at next?
I'll just go down that one at a time because I've lived and worked in every one of those areas. So Northern California doesn't need it. It has plenty of hard granite structure underwater. That's where all the abalone lived. And the abalone fishery, on a side note, needs to return. It's very good for the environment to have conscientious fishermen in it watching out for poachers. It's very, very important. So it needs to return. So getting into Southern California, yeah, we have 4 or 5 areas that we feel are ideal from here to the border. The Channel Islands, there's an extra layer there where it has to be approved by the Park Service. So only in areas where maybe there's been like a real impact from a ship sinking and ruining a reef or something of that nature. Sea Cortez, there's been a lot of interest. There's no kelp in there. That's mainly a light coral, sessile invertebrate lobster fish thing. Outside of La Paz, there's been interest there, but we're far enough along where we don't really, get involved in a lot of those machinations. If something comes out the other side where there's somebody down there that says we have some funding, can you make a reef right here? We certainly consider it. Other than that, we just kind of focus on our current areas because the cost is so high of making one of these.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about cost and who's paying for these. One question off the top of my head is, are you pitching this to resorts, like ocean resorts, that they could put an artificial reef and, create a great diving environment right off, shore of their resort? Have you gotten any takers on that?
We leave that to the Florida reef contractors. They're good at that. It's how they make their money. We're more interested in making something that looks like a historical kelp forest. and not being pulled around into different because each location it's like having, 5 new children that's going to require all of your love and focus. And there's only so much of that to go around. So we have to focus on the areas that, where we have a shovel in the sand.
Yeah, so maybe expanding in the areas you've already targeted is a better goal.
And the areas it's considerable. Now I don't now if somebody came back and said, um, if it was of large enough size and scope and it was near an area and there was a large budget to do what we need to do, we might make it work. So if it was $10 million or up, we would take a hard look at it. I wouldn't just throw my hands up.
So who is funding? Is it government organizations? Is it conservation organizations? Like who's buying the sea caves?
Right. Buying the sea caves answer is nobody. Uh, the funding has come from good old-fashioned fundraising events, talking to people. About half the money was my own personal life savings up to this point. But the other half, we have received some decent grants from like the San Diego Foundation. It's been a very good partner because they like cross-border projects. The county has done a few generous things for us, but nothing large enough to permit the Goleta Reef. That's going to cost $350,000 to permit that, and about 18 months of work, and we need to get going on it. And so we tend to take our next big steps when there's enough money in the bank to cover that next big step. I'm just businesses have been supportive, Decker Brands, folks like that. It's a beautiful cross section of humanity that supports it, but it's still not at a high enough level to make the wheels really spin.
Can you imagine getting the blue carbon credit market to the point where it could support ongoing work?
Yeah,
Like
well,
enough funding from that?
yes, and that's the dream, and I appreciate you giving me, the venue to talk about it for like-minded folks. If you paint a picture across the world of, say, our African hubs in Dakar and in the north of Kenya, where you're serving a good chunk of West Africa and a good chunk of East Africa into something called the Great African Food Reef. And then, having the world buy carbon, blue carbon, with the biodiversity credits to feed that essentially sustainable food program, a lot of it, that's a good thing. So there is very real moral reasons to push for it to happen.
There absolutely are. Diana's asking, you said 350K to permit the Goleta Reef, but is that a separate from the cost of actually installing?
Yes, so we have 16 in the water. That's when I say it took us 10 years to permit it. It was for the pilot project.
Okay.
And so they finally said yes. And I put them in. I had them in the water in 2 weeks before they changed their mind.
Yeah. No backsies.
Yeah. And they're absolutely going gangbusters. And yes, they are near the marine protected area. And yes, they do provide shelter for the small fish that get pushed out of the MPAs by the big fish. So they overflow and then they get further protection, right? But to go to phase 2, which is all of Goleta Bay, that's the 350,000 for the surveys and the environmental consulting and the agency fees, et cetera. There's no salary in there for our staff. We would still be donating our time even with the 350, and that's just what we signed up for.
All right, we've got multiple people who are all in on the idea. So you mentioned your mother's ashes in the sea cave. Have you thought about offering burial plots or being part of a sea cave as a way to raise funding? Our next month's meeting is on green burials, different
Okay.
ways that you can dispose of your body, whether through composting or other things. So this would fit right in with next month's meeting.
Do
What
I have to
about
wear a
sea cave
tuxedo
burials?
do I have to wear a tuxedo when I pour the ashes in? That's I draw the line at that. No, in California you cannot. You're not allowed to put in anything entombed in concrete. You can do a whole body burial. So California's off the table. It would be Mexico. Moving human remains over the border, tricky issue. You can bring them down as personal, legally in your personal stuff. So if somebody wanted to drive down to my yard and sponsor a sea cave and pour ashes in, I would consider it, but they would have to bring it themselves.
there you have it, guys. Leave notes for your family members on how to make that happen. There's so much to dive into here. But I know I don't want to keep you any longer because I told you you could go at 8:15.
And I ate dinner.
But I'm wondering whether, well, Polly's asking if you can get any funding from the state of California. So we know that there's this 30 by 30 plan. They're, deeply invested in getting to 30% of ocean waters protected. Is there any sort of avenue through the Department of Natural Resources that could work with you to fund a restoration?
The short answer is no. And there is money that comes to the state every year that could be used for reefing that the rest of the country does. And we don't. We choose not to. So I've learned not to rely on the state for funding. Here's what we really need is somebody to step up and say, well, here's $350 to go permit Goleta, or $1 million is a much better number. We can hire a couple of our own people in a small boat and stuff like that. So somebody says, here's $1 million, go do your thing. And then to fund the bigger picture, they would pre-buy a lot of the blue carbon, and they would either retire them if they have their own industrial footprint, or they can hold them and resell them and speculate on them and see if they go up maybe in value in the future and make something. No guarantee, right? But they cause the project to occur. So if somebody came along and said, I would talk to them about what that number is. We do have a current inventory of 1,700 and another 7,000 that'll be available in 6 weeks. And so that's the best way for this to happen, because it not only pays for it creates the feedback loop within the system we're trying to create. It creates the market by the offtake of it.
Yeah, and once it's going, maybe it can be self-sustaining.
That's right.
Just need to get it off the ground. Well, I know I really want to see this happen. People are talking in the chat, if I win the Powerball, maybe a philanthropist, maybe we could get Wallace Annenberg Foundation, the usual suspects.
I met with Rockefeller himself. I've met with every rich, famous person you could think of. And that's, I just think the person that's out there, or the people that are out there that are going to do this, are maybe not obvious. They're out there somewhere, but they're not the usual suspects. And through talks like this, they surface.
I feel like companies that, we're working on this climate super fund, polluters pay bill. We'd really like to see that pass next year, where the biggest polluters have to chip into a fund to clean up their messes. And it seems like, companies with oil spills should be funding reef restoration in California. So
Geez. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's just the little I know about that is so much of the oil changed hands to sort of like off-label consortiums, like not the major oil companies. And so that's a lot of these like weird little groups that are hard to figure out. So that's another one. We have gotten some of the mitigation funds that go into Santa Barbara, like $50,000. It's not enough to fund it, but it's appreciated. That is supposed to go from oil into natural projects. So there has been some of that.
Okay. Well, I think we've kept you long enough. I do want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us tonight. This is so important. And now is the fun moment when we ask everyone to just unmute and thank you and give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you
love
so
what you're
much.
doing here.
Fascinating.
Really
Thank you.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Very much.